So let's talk about how you approach the teaching tasks. You know, tasks 1 through 15 is primarily a casting exercise, and there's going to be some questions about principles of casting or essentials of casting. But primarily it's, can you control your rod tip, and do you know why and how you control your rod tip, and then what are these different casts for? Why do we do a reach mend? Why do we have to know a roll cast? That kind of stuff. So it's fishing application and casting. Now this part is, there's two pieces to it. One, again, they're going to really delve into, do you understand teaching mechanics? Do you understand the essentials of casting? Why do wide loops happen, narrow loops, tailing loops? What happens when you go from 30 to 50 feet? You need to have all this very, very clear in your head. So this is an important part. But if you know how to cast by now, this is going to be a lot easier. But you need to still practice understanding all of these principles. The one thing that I would suggest highly, I guess the wording in the exam is pretty ambiguous for all of 16 through 22, or most of it anyway. There are 3 ways to approach it as an examiner. Well, for instance, on task number 16, it says teach a beginning student to pick up and lay down. There are some examiners who just want you to tell them, they want you to tell them the steps that you would use. 1, rod tip down. 2, accelerate to a stop at 2 o'clock, let's say. 3, pause, say hi mom. 4, make a forward cast. 5, bring your rod tip down and follow it down. So that's all they want. Some examiners want you to explain how you might teach those steps. They want you to just explain it. How would you teach the pickup? What would you do? How would you teach the pause? How would you teach the forward cast and whatever? And then some examiners, I'm in one of these, in that camp, I want you to show me how you would teach those tasks. And the reason I do that is because I've been into a lot of classrooms. I used to observe teachers, hundreds of teachers, and I can tell you that every single 3rd grade teacher in America knows how to teach multiplication. They don't maybe know how to teach it, but they know the steps of multiplication, every single one of them. There are some teachers who get 80 to 90% of their class to completely master multiplication in a semester. There are others who at the end of the year only have 25% of their students mastering multiplication. It's how they teach the steps that matters. So I want to see how you teach the steps. You may not have examiners want to do that. Matter of fact, they're going to think that's just a waste of time. They just want to know, can you tell me what the steps are? So you need to ask before you start the teaching task, what would you like me to do? For instance, task number 16, what would you like me to do? Do you want me to just give you the tasks, the steps to the task? Would you like me to explain to you how I teach those steps? Or do you want me to actually use you as a student and I'm going to teach you as I would a student? So all the tasks that I have demonstrated, tasks 16 through 22, I've taken a final approach, which means that some of them are 4, 5, 6 minutes long. This whole exam asks that 16 through 22 take no longer than 45 minutes. And I don't think it should take you more than 45 minutes if you even doing it the way I might suggest you do it. But be prepared to do it the other ways. And don't bore an examiner. Don't start off and have to take 10 minutes to teach task number 17. That's bad teaching, and it's gonna hurt you on this exam. So you've got to be very practiced, very disciplined. You have to have a lesson plan, and you have to have it done. Like we talked about in the last section, teach real students. I can't tell you how important that is. You've got to get out and teach real students, because that is going to help you understand when you backtrack, when you skip stuff, how important a good lesson plan is to being able to teach people. And if you think that it's hard teaching a real student, wait till you're teaching an MCI examiner. You think you're nervous teaching a bunch of kids or people at a church parking lot or something? Wait till you're teaching an MCI. It's going to be a lot more nerve-wracking. So you need to have that system kind of down pat. Stay on the subject. We've talked about that. Don't get into other stuff. Pick up and lay down. All you're doing is teaching to pick up and lay down. You don't have to do a lot of other stuff. You may want to just say, well, normally I wouldn't teach like me. I would tell them, hey, normally I don't teach the pick up and lay down first. I teach the grass drill and a paintbrush first, because I want to teach smooth acceleration and the idea of a forward cast all by itself without a rod in the hand. And I want to teach the grass drill where I'm teaching horizontal casts before I start teaching this. But if I don't have time, I have to teach the pick up and lay down. Just the way it is, holistically, bam, 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 and in 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, they have to have pretty much control of it. Make sure again that you answer questions very carefully, very succinctly, and very concisely. What causes a tail? A dip in a rod tip path, period. Don't go any farther. Make them ask you the next question. They're going to have to ask you then, okay, fine, what causes a dip in a rod tip path? And then you're going to go on to the next thing. Make them ask questions. Your answers should not be more than a couple of sentences long, maybe 3 sentences long, depending on the sophistication of the question. But there's no reason for most answers to drag on into paragraphs. That's probably meaning that you're talking about a lot of stuff you don't have to talk about, and that's going to bring you down a rabbit hole where an examiner is going to catch you making a mistake, and then everything's falling. As soon as you realize you've made a mistake, man, then the nerves start going. That old reptilian brain in the back of the bottom of your neck starts moving, and then you've lost it. And that's when people start falling apart. So you've got to keep yourself under control the whole time, and the way to do that is one answer at a time. The other thing is if an examiner asks you something that you don't know, don't BS them. Just tell them, hey, you know, I'm not really sure. I don't know what the answer to that is. Could you tell me? Or what do you think the answer is? Could you tell me what the answer is? I'm not sure. There shouldn't be too many questions any examiner is going to ask you that you don't know the answer to, because every legitimate question you should have studied, and you should know it cold. Another thing you might want to do is consider when you demonstrate, try not to talk a lot when you're demonstrating. In other words, I'm going to do the pick up and lay down. Pick it up. You ask your student, tell your student, I'm going to pick this up and lay it down and show you what I'm going to do. Now, you can say, now I'm going to describe each step. Pick up, step 1, step 2, step 3. We're going to talk about teaching techniques in a second. But try to avoid talking and demonstrating at the same time. Not always possible, but it's a good rule to follow. So one of the things that's going to happen very likely during the course of a test, you may have an examiner ask you, how would you teach a group of 6 people how to do the roll cast? So when you get asked that kind of a question, the first thing you want to respond is that, hey, I would assume they're all beginners. So set up the parameters of how you're going to answer the question. I would assume I have 45 minutes. Now, if they want to set up the parameters, well, let them set up the parameters, and then you have to go from there. But man, if you can set up the parameters yourself, it saves you a lot of grief. So somebody asks you, if somebody comes to you and says they want a double haul because they're going to go to Belize to go bone fishing and they've never double hauled before, how would you go about doing that? Well, you're going to have to ask, or you're going to have to tell the examiner, well, here's what I would ask them on the phone. I would ask them, how much time do you have for lessons? How many weeks do you have before you go to Belize? And then I would have to make up a lesson plan dependent on that. Also, I mean, I'm going to have to watch them cast. If they can't even cast 40 feet with one hand, then and they're going to Belize tomorrow, then I think I give them a free lesson and just tell them, oh well, you know, I don't know what we can do for you. I do the best I can, but I wouldn't charge them because you're certainly not going to be able to teach them how to double haul unless they're just a magician. And there are some people like that, but that's going to be one of the things you want to do. So make sure you set the parameters for any of the questions that you're asked. Make sure that you say whatever you need to say to make sure that you can answer the question the way it needs to be answered, because otherwise they may be thinking 6 people, they're all beginners and you've got 5 minutes, and now you go on this whole thing about what you're going to do. How would you teach somebody the roll cast? Well, what happened? You'd have to say, I would assume that they already have done some casting, because otherwise you're going to have to teach them how to do a grip. You're going to have to teach them some other stuff. If they've never done a roll cast before, they've never touched a fly rod before, there's some stuff you're going to have to do that you wouldn't have to do with people who have cast before. So you're going to have to say, if they say, how would you teach the roll cast? You say, well, this is basically it. I'm assuming somebody's already done some casting. I would teach them step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that kind of thing. If they say, what if you have somebody who's never cast before? How would you teach it? Then you're going to have to say, well, the first thing I guess we would have to do is just talk about a grip, basically. We'd have to just discuss a little bit about the role of a fly line and the fact that the fly line, the weight of the fly line against the movement of the rod is going to cause a cast. And I may just have to, if I only got 15 minutes to do it, I may just have to teach them rote. In other words, hey, just do this. I can't explain why it works, just do it. But you need to understand how you would react to those different scenarios and practice those in your head. I think that's super important because you're going to get some of those. When you have a new student, and that may be something, somebody calls you up and says they want some lessons, what do? Well, I'm going to ask them physically, do they have any physical issues? I want to know if they, last year I had a guy call me up and he was learning how to cast out of a wheelchair. I took him fishing this last year and got him into a boat, and we cast from a boat the whole day. But I needed to know that. I knew that before I went up to see him, that he was in a wheelchair. The other thing is, what do you want to learn out of this? What do you want to get out of this? How much time do you have? What are your goals? What do you want to learn in let's say they say, I want an hour. What is it in an hour you want to know? Do you want to know principles? Because some people are interested in that. They want to know the principles of casting and they can self-teach. Other people just, hey, I just want to know how to do a pick up and a lay down and get my fly to 40 feet because I'm going to Wyoming and a guide says if I can do that, I can catch fish. Then that's what you do. So make sure you're doing that. The other thing, check their gear. I've had people show up, somebody else has put the back end of a fly line on the front end. Obviously that's not going to load the rod properly. They've got a leader that's, the leader starts with 4X tippet. It's just not going to turn over. They've got a leader that's 18 feet long or 2 feet long. They show up with they bought a garage sale line, and it's a weighted line. It's a tungsten line. They think it's a floating line. You never know. So ask them if you can kind of check out their equipment, and you want to make sure that you have extra stuff in case their stuff isn't working. But always try to work with their equipment. The other thing I learned the hard way, man, before you walk up to somebody, I was in a clinic a long time ago, and some guy's throwing tailing loops. And so I walk up there and I say, hey, let me just demonstrate, and I took his hand, and boy, the first thing we did was throw a tailing loop. Well, the reason we threw a tailing loop, as it turned out, he had just a wishy-washy 5-weight rod, and he's got a 7-weight line on it. Man, any kind of activity that wasn't super smooth was going to cause that tip to bounce and come back up again and cause a tail. So before you make a fool out of yourself, and you should make sure, a guy can't cast 50 feet, could be a lot of things. I've had people show up at clinics, they can't haul. I try to haul, I can't haul. Their line is filthy dirty. It doesn't slide through the guides. There's no way you can haul unless the line is pretty slick. So we're going to work on that a little bit. So make sure that you understand what your students' abilities are and what their goals are before you start a lesson, and be able to tell that. That's why I think it's important for you to get out and teach. Volunteer. Don't go taking this test unless you volunteered. And the last thing with teaching is, if you fished a lot, you understand why you're teaching some of these tasks. If you fished a bunch in different situations, now you understand why it is that you are learning a Belgian cast or a constant tension cast or a reach mend or whatever else. So those are the kinds of things we're looking for when we get to the teaching tasks.